What celebrities have you encountered that were either really nice or really horrible? I ran into Adam Sandler outside of a Planet Fitness in Brooklyn in early 2016. As I was leaving Planet Fitness, it looked like he was walking in. We made eye contact, so I stopped and held the door for him. He got to the door and stopped right before he walked through, in one of those fake poses that little kids make when you tell them to freeze. I stood there holding the door, plenty confused, for about 5 seconds. We just stood there, him motionless, and I, standing there holding the door. Finally, he turned his head and said in the stereotypical Adam Sandler voice, "Who we kidding? I'm not going in there." Giant grin on his face. We both laughed and then he continued down the street. I met him down in Nantucket one summer, a few years ago. I had no money, so he bought me and my friends a pizza and shared it with us. Probably the greatest moment of my life. I met John Candy on a plane when I was a little kid, while traveling with my family. He was a big man. He had the whole row to himself in front of us, with the armrest up between seats so he could be more comfortable. The stewardesses were blocking anyone from coming up and bothering him, even though they themselves were not exactly leaving him alone, what with talking to him constantly, and laughing at his enjoyable banter the whole trip. At some point he got up to go to the bathroom. When he came back, he looked at me, pretended to do a double take like he was surprised and said, "Hey, you're the quietest kid ever, don't you talk?" The way he said it was so friendly that I just smiled and giggled. Then he had a pleasant conversation with my parents, who had been dying to talk to him the entire flight, but were too polite to bother him. Not even 2 weeks later, we heard he had passed. My mom spotted Robin Williams once, and she went up to him and asked if she could get a quick photo. She didn't realize he was there in the middle or about to do something with the Make-A-Wish Foundation, so she waited until they were done around 20 to 30 minutes later, and then a bunch of the kids and people wanted photos with him. He made it a point to stick around and told his staff, "I think that woman wanted a photo," and made sure she got it. Mom was thrilled. He was such a humble, nice dude. I met Paul Rudd on a flight from New York. Sat next to him on the plane. My buddy leaned over and told me that he wanted to compliment him on this band shirt he wore when making Clueless, but he didn't want it to be weird. So his solution was to write him a note and slip it to him. So he does this, and Paul just gets this nervous look on his face, opens the note and reads it, starts cracking up laughing, leaned over to us and said, "Best note ever." He then told us the whole story of the shirt, how he fought with the costume department about it, because it was the shirt he wore to set that day. We talked the whole flight. Dude was super cool. Edit. Band is Trip Shakespeare. So I have a fun Paul Rudd story. I worked at CVS at the time, and my manager had just eliminated smoke breaks, so I'm on edge and going nuts. Paul Rudd walks in and sees me. For reference, I am generally disheveled in appearance. I had a wizard beard braided down almost to my nuts, and I had worked overnight unloading the truck before popping on register. He looks at me and just goes, "Rough night." I laughed, nodded. I slurped at my coffee, which was more or less empty at this point. My boss comes out of the office to yell at me about something, and Paul drops what he's doing, runs to my counter, and rings the little bell to interrupt the boss. I run over and he has a single butterfinger on the counter. I ring him out, and he laughs. He says, "How long you been here?" Truthfully, I told him 10 hours. I sputter something about loving him in fundamentals of caring. He looks at my boss and says, "The best thing ever. I need my name to help me to my car with my purchase." My back hurts. Mine taking over for him, so I go outside. He bums a cigarette off me and bought me coffee. He wouldn't let me inside until I finished a whole cigarette and coffee. Boss came out to bitch. He laughs and says, "I still need his help loading my car." Honestly, it's actually probably the single best customer moment I've ever had in my time in retail. My mom and sister met The Rock when he was still a wrestler. They had a couple car seats and tons of bags, having a hell of a time getting off the plane and people were waiting. And then this massive guy offered to carry some things for them, and they happily took the help. He grabbed some bags and held the baby carrier with my niece in it and helped them off the plane and left. After people kept going up to them, asking how they knew The Rock. They were very confused until someone explained who he was. I met the St. Bernard dog from Beethoven at Planet Hollywood when I was a kid. Seemed like a pretty nice dog in person. Met Dave Chappell a few years back. Long story short, a friend of a friend got me and two friends into an after party. We were sitting at the bar when his manager offered us some shots. We talked with his manager for a while. Then Dave sat down near us. Dave was kind of sitting by himself, and he looks over at us and goes, "What's going on, fellas?" And we talked to him for about an hour. We thanked him for coming to our town, talked about music, sports, all kinds of stuff. Super cool dude. One of my favorite memories. I met Vin Diesel at a truck stop diner when I was a kid. It was like 4 in the morning, and me, my grandpa, and Vin and his friend were the only ones in the diner. We ended up getting seated at the table next to them. Vin and a friend were getting ready to go on some fishing trip, which was made obvious by the clothes they were wearing. My grandpa struck up a conversation about fishing with him, completely oblivious to who he was. He was a really nice guy, and apparently knew a great deal about fishing techniques. I was a bit geeked out, and didn't say much or contribute to the conversation, but I spent the next hour of our road trip explaining to my grandpa who Vin Diesel was, and why it was a huge deal we just met him. I served Daniel Radcliffe his dessert at an event, and tripped and spilled some of it on him, probably due to seeing that I was serving Daniel Radcliffe. He stood up and started apologizing profusely to me, was very sweet and asked if I was okay. When I was a teenager, I met Neil Armstrong at a retirement ceremony that my dad brought me to. It was at a museum and it was a private event. There was time for everyone to wander the museum, and my dad saw Mr. Armstrong looking at one of the planes that my dad helped design. Nobody else around. They struck up a conversation and Neil asked me questions about what I was studying and how I felt about the work my dad did. My dad worked on classified planes when I was much younger. He seemed like such a gentle guy to me. A bunch of other men suddenly joined us and started asking him for autographs, which he declined. It seemed to snap him out of his happy mood, and he kind of shut down and walked away. At that time I thought he was a bit of a jerk for not saying goodbye or anything. But I recently read about the hard time he had with fame, and I guess it makes sense. Was a server for Tom Cruise. Pretty cool dude. To be honest, was a bit out of touch, but that's to be expected. The funny part was, he didn't know what he could order off of our menu, so he had to call his nutritionist to find out what to get. Ended up getting fried chicken. I met Matthew Lillard, his wife, and newborn daughter. Literally after the release of the first Scooby-Doo movie. My family always host 4th of July parties in our beach house, and he party crashed. I was like 7 or 8 at the time, and my cousins were freaking out saying Shaggy is here. Of course I immediately sprinted over, and he was eating a hot dog. He was so cool. The whole time he was in character, and offering me to have him go get a hot dog for me. I remember my little cousins asking where Scooby was at, and he replied, "Oh, Scoobs ate so many hot dogs that he's like having a food coma." Seriously, one of most highlighted memory dating back to my youth. Years ago, working hotel security in Edmonton, I was escorting Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers in the elevator, down from their rooms to the lobby, to get in their airport limo. I am 6 feet 5 inches, and so I towered over her. Dolly looked me up and down, and said in her cute southern drawl, "They sure grow 'em big up here in Canada." She was just as sweet as you could imagine. Kenny, on the other hand, and I feel bad for saying this, due to his recent passing, treated me like the help, which I of course was, and even made a huffy impatient noise when, slightly flustered by Dolly's remark, I struggled to find the key to put the elevator into independent service. Dolly touched my arm, looked me in the eye, and said, "Darlin', don't you pay him any attention. We appreciate y'all." I guess I got the good and the bad in one shot. Used to do delivery runs for a catering company, and we would get a lot of celebrities at the airport that ordered from us. Johnny Depp was the only one I ever saw face to face. Dude pulled a wadded up bill from his pocket, and tossed it at me. I thought it was cool I got a tip directly from him at all, but once I had it all unwarded, it was $100 bill. I met Jim Carrey when I was like 11 at a party my parents attended. I couldn't stop staring at him. He was behaving so normal, and then when he noticed me staring, he did a mask facial expression and started staring at me. He's a genuinely funny guy, and probably has the purest of heart. I met a few celebs working as an event photographer for fundraisers from time to time. Chevy Chase. Well, the stories are true. He was a huge jerk. Jamie Lee Curtis was one of the sweetest people I've ever met. Easily the nicest celeb I met working the camera. Very considerate and thoughtful person. She kept checking with us to see if she could do anything for us, or if we needed any more shots she could help with. Great sense of humor too. Tom Hiddleston told me my dog was awesome, so that was the highlight of my life. Bumped into Gordon Ramsay in the lift in a hotel in Hong Kong. He was very friendly. We didn't talk to him or ask for a picture. I just blurted out, "You're Gordon Ramsay," and he acknowledged and smiled. He insisted on us going first because we had our suitcases with us. Wished us a nice day. Said bye several times when we saw him in the lobby again. Very friendly. When my dad was about 9, 1964, he was on a plane from LA to Heathrow, sitting in coach with his mom. The stewardess came back and excitedly asked him if he wanted to meet a Beatle. My dad said sure, but didn't really know the Beatles at that age, and only said yes because that's kinda what you do at that age. He sat on the couch next to George. Different time. Airlines treated you like people. George folds up his newspaper and says, "So, do you like my music?" My dad says, like a confused 10-year-old, no. Apparently George smiled and went back to reading his newspaper. My dad sat there like a doofus for like 5 to 10 minutes, until the stewardess came and got him. So George Harrison was cool to children, and my dad's the most stone cold 10-year-old ever.